in November 2023, I read all of Brandon Sanderson's sci-fi series, Skyward, or as he sometimes calls it, the Cytoverse. Now, you might be asking, was it worth it? And that's what this video is here to tell. So, first book in the series is Skyward. As you've probably noticed by the big SF stickers, I got the first 3 books from the library. Skyward is the story of Spencer, and to be honest, so are all of the books. They're the story of Spencer, who is a young woman and a pilot in the military for a human colony, which is called Detritus. Now, Detritus is special because it is, as far as they're aware, possibly the last human colony in the galaxy, and it's surrounded by this debris field. So the entire planet is surrounded by this like big metal sky, basically, and there are like giant floating lamps that provide light to the surface because the entirety of space is obscured. And though the shell that surrounds the planet has also like automated gun turrets on it. So sorry, my cat is shedding a lot of hair, seemingly directly into my nose. So yeah, I know you. Sorry, he's looking at me. So the shell has these automated guns on it, and they fire on anything that comes near. So basically, the humans on Detritus cannot escape into space, and the aliens that are constantly attacking Detritus cannot bring any large planetary destruction style weapons to bear against the planet. So they're kind of locked in this stalemate where the humans and the aliens can only fight one-on-one with fighter pilots. And Spencer's father was a very notable fighter pilot because he was the only coward in the history of the DDF, the Defiant Defence Force. And he's called a coward because during a major battle in which the base that the humans have on the surface, where they launched their fighters from, was almost destroyed, he turned and ran and was destroyed shortly afterwards. Now, and he's the only pilot, in recorded history to do so, especially during such an important battle. So we join the book just before this battle with Spencer and her dad, and she actually watches the battle from the surface of the planet. Now, most of the Defiant humans, the people of Detritus, they live in caves under the surface. All right, buddy, you comfy? They live in caves under the surface, and those caves, when the people of Detritus crash landed there, they found these caves to be full of fabrication machinery. So in the distant past, humans tried to conquer the galaxy, and it looks like that this was one of the humans' kind of outward bases, because it has the facilities to build starfighters, it has the facilities to do things like grow food supplies and things like that. So the humans of Detritus don't starve, and they have this kind of caste society that they slowly build, where the poorest people live in the most dangerous parts of the planet, to the surface, and then as you go deeper and deeper, you basically get richer and richer. So genuinely, it's such a fascinating society that Brandon creates on Detritus, and I think that he manages to create this mythology around the Detritus and around the Defiance crew, which kind of gives a really strong background. and also it being actual humans from Earth rather than fantasy characters that you might expect from Brandon, for example. I mean, you can see when you read this book that a lot of these elements were probably originally planned for the Cosmere, and I would even say I've seen some elements of cytonic abilities, which is something that kind of comes more later in the books. These cytonic abilities, you see kind of an analog to them in the Sunlit Man, in the Cosmere. So quite interesting, really, in terms of a storytelling endeavor. Where we join Skyward is that Spencer has become an outcast because of her father's cowardice, and then she decides, and it's always been her dream to kind of redeem her family name and join the military and become like the bravest pilot with the most kills. And she eventually, through some kind of happenstance, she gets into the military. So not possibly the traditional way, but she does get in, and she joins Skyward Flight. Skyward Flight is full of really interesting characters like Jorgen, FM, Spencer's best friend Rig, and there's lots of really interesting team kind of dynamic going on there. Jorgen is the son of like the president, and he basically gets in to flight school without even having to take the exam. So Spencer is already kind of predisposed to not like him. It's a really, really good book. It's kind of a mix of like the Hunger Games and Top Gun. Like we have, multiple characters do die during the flight training process because they do send them against active enemy pilots because there's so few trained pilots. And you see a really, really interesting world, and that world kind of expands when Spencer has almost a How to Train Your Dragon moment when she finds an artificially intelligent, super advanced spaceship that's been left by the previous human, the previous, what she believes are the previous humans who used to live on Detritus when it was a military base. Really interesting concept, really interesting story. I think Spencer and several of the crew of Skyward Flight are fantastic characters. Skyward is probably the second best book in the series, which is tough when it's the first one because it's kind of downhill from there for a couple of books. But all in all, I loved Skyward. I read it super, super quickly. And the one thing I would recommend is if you're in the UK and you can get the UK versions of the audiobooks, they are so good. I started reading this book and I was devouring it, but I was worried that I would not finish the book series in time, and so I bought the audiobook from Audible to listen to while I was at the gym, and that ended up actually being my preferred way to read this series of books. So I read probably like 40% of Skyward via Audible, but then when it came to Starsight, the second book in the series, I actually read this like way more than half on via Audible. So Starsight, there has been some interesting things going on with Spencer towards the end of book one, where she is discovering that she is not strictly a vanilla human being. She's got superhuman abilities. She has access to this cytonic magic system. I won't spoil too much of it, but there's some really interesting stuff going on with it. And then as they're just kind of starting to explore the world of kind of post the events of Skyward and the kind of changes that happen there, a alien crash lands on Detritus, and she is also cytonic, and she gives Spencer kind of this cytonic impression of a mission that she was undertaking, to basically visit and infiltrate the alien race or races that have been oppressing the humans of Detritus. So Spencer uses a kind of holographic disguise to impersonate this alien named Alanique, and she's from a race of people called the Erdale, and so Spencer then goes to Starsight, this space platform, and infiltrates this enemy race, group of races. This book is not as good as Skyward, and the only reason that I would say it's not as good as Skyward is because it doesn't have the characters from Skyward. So it's got a couple of really interesting, really good characters, but I would say that the specific characters and crew that you spend most of your time with in Starsight just isn't as good as the original Skyward flight team, and I think a lot of that becomes clear because you only see a couple of them again, and two of the major characters basically disappear after this book. The two of the major Starsight characters basically disappear, and also you do get interludes with Jorgen back on Detritus, but I would say you don't really see enough of the Skyward first book characters in terms of how much I really loved them. So I really wish that we had been able to see a little bit more from those characters. The story of Starsight itself is very good, and I think that thematically it's a bit more interesting than the first book, because the first book the theme is kind of like, Spencer's on the outside all the time looking in, whereas this second book is her kind of trying to integrate into this alien society undercover and realizing that these aliens, they're not this evil conquering empire. They're just like a society. They're a society of real people, just like the humans of Detritus are. And whilst they have some interesting prejudices against humans, I would say that the overall the characters that you meet in Starsight are really kind of really interesting in terms of how they fit into the story as a whole. Starsight also has a huge expansion of the universe, so you get to see different kinds of technology. You get to see tons of alien races. I mean, Skyward you could basically read standalone if you wanted to, but Starsight really, really expands on the world and the lore and the world building, and we get introduced to these things called delvers, which are kind of like these planet-sized, destructive, like space god monster things, which become a main plot line for the rest of the book. And we're also introduced to a lot of characters that become major characters as the story goes on. As I said, Starsight has some really interesting themes and is well written, but because the characters weren't as interesting to me as the characters in Skyward, and the bonds between those characters are necessarily not as strong because Spencer is pretending to be somebody else throughout the whole book, so she can't really get as close or reveal as much of herself as she could in book one. But I still really enjoyed Starsight, and I think that when I was reviewing them, I said that Skyward was basically as high a 4-star as you could get without being a 5, and Starsight was basically as low a 4-star as you could get without being a 3. So whilst they're both 4-star books in my mind, Skyward is clearly better. After Starsight, you can, if you want, and I would suggest you do, read the Skyward Flight novellas. You read the first two, which are Sunreach and Redawn. I listened to all three of the Skyward Flight books via audiobook from Audible. I really, really enjoyed all three. The first book, Sunreach, has a really strong focus on on the relationship between Rig and FM and their budding friendship, then romance. Minor spoiler there. But Sunreach is very much kind of the first experiment, I feel, in writing Skyward books outside of the POV of Spencer. Because at the end of Starsight, Spencer basically has to escape the superiority in a way that we might not have, you might not expect. And so the Skyward Flight books are about the team from Skyward Flight without Spencer. So there's basically no Spencer in any of these books. And the first book's protagonist is FM, who is kind of bonding with the slugs, the Tainics, and also trying to get to know Rig. And you get to see a little bit more of Jorgen in there as well. Jorgen feels like kind of the secondary protagonist in the first two books, novellas, and then he is the protagonist in the third. And I feel like Jorgen is probably my favourite character in the series going through, although there's a couple of characters in the final book that really stand out. I kind of reframed my opinion of them throughout. But yeah, the Skyward Flight novellas, they give some really good what's going on in the real world sort of background, while Spencer is where she is in Cytonic. So I definitely would recommend reading them. They're not 100% essential reading, but they're well written. They're co-written by Jancy Patterson, who is a friend of Brandon's. So from what I understand, he plotted them and then she did the writing. But there's no huge difference in the quality of writing. I think the quality of writing is just as good. The first novella is probably the weakest. And I would say that's because it feels very much like a side story. So if, for example, we were reading Cytonic with the three Skyward Flight novels intermixed in between, as you know, like a multi-POV story like you would have, I think that would have been much better. But almost binge reading each POV, I'm not sure 100% that worked for me as well as it would have if it had been a single volume. But I do like the choice to give you kind of that more focused reading. It's a difficult one to say really on the novellas. So I read the first two novellas and then I read Cytonic. Cytonic was unfortunately a little disappointing. The two previous books, Starsight and Skyward, so this is the third full novel, Starsight and Skyward were really, really good. And Cytonic, if you had asked me, if this had been been a writer who does not plan his series as well and as extensively as Brandon, I would almost expect that Cytonic was an idea that they came up with while writing book 2 and decided to slot it into the series. Because you could almost, the first two and then Defiant with maybe some of the elements of Cytonic would have been a really fantastic trilogy. But Cytonic feels like a side quest the whole time. It feels like a diversion from the main story. So Cytonic, basically, Spencer goes somewhere called the Nowhere, which is an alternate universe. And there are a lot of peculiar rules to this alternate universe. And I would imagine that when this book series was originally conceived as part of the Cosmere, the Nowhere might have been Shadesmire. So the Nowhere is very much this alternate universe where time and space don't function in the same way. And also your ability to perceive time passing is reduced the longer you're there. So, you know, Spencer, I think there's one point where Spencer's like, oh, we've only been here a couple of days. And she's been on that particular place for like a month. Um, as I said, and I think a lot of people agree, when I watch some reviews around these books as I've been going through them, most people tend to agree that Cytonic doesn't really work. Um, it's one of those. So I would say that I loved all of the Cytoverse books except for Cytonic, which I would say I liked but didn't love. Um, I was never at any point in danger of DNFing it, of putting it down. But it took me quite a while to read, and it felt a little samey as I went through. So the new characters that you're introduced to in Cytonic, so you get again a new cast of characters, but I feel like this new cast of characters was even less interesting than the Starsight characters, possibly as a function of them being trapped in the nowhere. So they obviously don't, they don't change and grow and develop in the same way that characters in the somewhere do, because of the way that time affects them. The lore drop in Cytonic, so like the big reveal. So basically every book has a reveal. The Skyward one is the reveal of like what really happened to Spencer's dad. The Starsight reveal is like what's really going on with the hyperdrives and how the superiority achieves cytonic speeds in space, hyperjumping. And then Cytonic is kind of, the reveal is like the nature of a specific element of the story, which ties back into the short story that Brandon wrote, Defending Elysium, which I also wrote but haven't really included in this just recap discussion, because honestly you could skip that one. You need to have read it before Cytonic, I would say, because it does reference, and it literally took me 40 minutes, and I do reference it in Cytonic quite a bit towards the end of the book. But you don't need to have read it. It is free on Brandon's website, though. So, yeah, Cytonic was a little disappointing overall, but a good experience. It ends well. The reveal is really good, possibly the best one of the series. So, yes, still don't regret reading it. Definitely the weakest of the bunch. A 3-star book for me. Finally, we get to the finale. Defiant, named after the original ship that they arrived on to Detritus. And actually, Defiant is kind of like what they've ended up naming the people. So they call themselves, the Defiant... the Defiant Caverns, I think, is what they originally called themselves, something like that. So the Defiant is the final book in the series. There is a sequel series coming called Skyward Legacy, written by the author of the novellas, Jancy Patterson. However, Defiant was excellent. Defiant is my favourite book in the series. Brandon's always been good at endings. I think we all know that, looking at Mistborn, and every single Sanderson book, honestly, has an incredible ending. Which often might redeem some slower parts in the beginning of the book or the middle of the book. I felt especially that with Way of Kings, for example, that the ending redeemed how slow I found the first third. But the ending of this series and the ending of Defiant is truly excellent. A fantastic space battle on a scale we've not really seen before. I really enjoyed how much time we spend with Spencer. And we get a lot more time with, these supporting characters you can also see on the cover, but won't spoil that for you. I really, really love Defiant. What we see in Defiant is Spencer returning to the somewhere from the nowhere, a changed woman. So she's really changed through her time away from the Defiant crew, from the Skyward flight. And we see those changes in her coming into conflict with her role as, the Defiant Defense Force's most strongest weapon. So she is just this incredibly powerful figure that thematically is very at odds with that power. And I thought that was a really, really interesting story for Brandon to explore. I think it worked really well, especially with where you see Spencer start the series in Skyward. We also get an evolution of a couple of other characters like Jorgen, and we even get to spend some time with quite a few alien characters that have kind of joined the main cast. And the final kind of the big villain and the final reveal in this book is genuinely really excellent. I think that this book really made it. I wouldn't have regretted reading the whole series if this book was just good, but because it was so good, it really it almost elevates the whole series by where you see Brandon is leading throughout these books. So yeah, I absolutely loved Defiant. Now, the question that this video is going to be is, was it worth it to read the Skyward books? And I've just answered that. It is worth it. I would prepare yourself for Cytonic to maybe not hit the mark as well as the others do. But, and it is, there is that very steady decline. So book 1 is great. Book 2 is really good. Book 3 is good. And then book 4 is the best of the series. So it ends on a high. I think there are several moments in Defiant that I was like properly emotional for. There are several moments where I was like pumping the air, excited. So all in all, I would really recommend this series, and I don't regret reading it at all. I spent basically the entire month of November reading Sanderson books, with 4 full novels and 3 novellas being part of this Skyward series, and a short story too. And I think that was a fantastic use of time, which I really enjoyed, and I would heavily recommend this series to anyone who is looking for some sci-fi, or maybe you've caught up on the Cosmere and you're looking for a new series by Brandon Sanderson to get into. I would definitely say this is of a quality with, say, for example, his Secret Projects. So if you enjoyed those, I would say that this series is on that sort of level par. Maybe not the highs of the Skyward series are not as high as the Mistborn or the highs of Stormlight Archive, but I do think that they are still very high, and I really enjoyed them. And I think the characters are fantastic, especially Spencer, Jorgen, and a few of the other characters. A few other characters that I don't want to go too deep into naming because I don't want to spoil which ones become important for you if you decide to read it. It's obvious though that Spencer and Jorgen are pretty important. But yeah, I had a great time. If you have read the Skyward series and you want to let me know what your favourite book is, or your favourite characters or plot moments, then pop them down in the comments below. If you are interested in reading the Skyward series, and you're adding it to your TBR because of this video, let me know. I'd love to hear that sort of thing. My channel is a way for me to talk about books, because my wife is sick of hearing me rant and rave about the things that I love. So this is, you guys are the void that I am shouting my praises into. So it'd be great if sometimes the void shouted back. If you'd like to see more Sanderson stuff, I have loads more Sanderson videos on my channel. I've also got some more sci-fi series on my channel, some more fantasy series. I'll be starting 2 big two big sci-fi series next year. So if you're a sci-fi reader, keep subscribed, and we'll be back in January with loads of cool sci-fi stuff. And thank you so much for watching this one. Please like the video if you liked it. Subscribe to see more stuff from the channel, and I will speak to you in the next one. Bye.